Your Excellency, President Ilham Aliyev, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Ismail Siragildin, and I am a co-chair of the Board of Trustees of the Nizami Ganjavi International Center, and we are very honored to welcome you to this opening session of the 9th Global Baku Forum. And it is my great privilege to, in this initial session, to ask His Excellency President Ilham Aliyev, President of the Republic of Azerbaijan, to take the floor for his opening keynote address to this 9th Global Baku Forum. And with that, the forum will be started. Your Excellency.
Thank you very much. Good morning, dear friends, ladies and gentlemen, dear presidents, dear co-chairs of Nizami Ganjavi International Center. I welcome you all and wish to express gratitude for being with us today. 9th Global Baku Forum opens today, and I'm sure that the discussions, as always, will be very productive because we have a great audience, members of Nizami Ganjavi International Center, and guests participating at the forum, I'm sure will contribute to a very open and sincere discussion on the most urgent issues on global arena. And I'm sure that discussions and also exchange of views will help to elaborate new approaches towards resolution of the issues which are on the top of the global agenda. During its activity, Nizami Ganjavi International Center transformed into one of the leading international institutions addressing global issues and managing to embrace broad international community. And we met yesterday with members of board, and I was informed that at the 9th forum, we have representatives, high-level representatives from almost 50 countries. And this is much more than a year ago. So this demonstrates the attractiveness of our discussions. This demonstrates that this platform is needed, and it's very useful. It has a very important practical impact, and I'm sure what will be discussed these days in Baku and also in Shusha on Sunday will be important for decision makers, because elaboration of new approaches is needed today maybe as never before. I'd like to express gratitude to the co-chairs of NGIC, Madam Vicky Freiberger and Mr. Serageldin, for their outstanding contribution in this transformation of the center and the Global Forum, which I think now is the top list of international fora. And also like to express gratitude to all members of board for their active role in this transformation. When I talk about new approaches, it's clear that the world has changed since we met last November here in Gülistan Palace. The change is fundamental with so far unpredictable consequences, but it's clear that the world will be different, and it is already different. Therefore, discussions, exchange of views, sometimes contradictions of different opinions, that's what is needed in order to elaborate the new approaches. And every country, of course, should contribute to that, first of all, with respect to security measures, because issues of security now become the top issue on international arena, of international agenda. And at the same time, I'm sure that open discussions about the current situation in Europe is needed. And Global Baku Forum is an excellent platform for that. It's an inclusive forum which accumulates opinions from different sides. And I think that's how it should be, because we all need to work closely in order to make the world safer and more secure. At the same time, also I'm sure that one of the issues on agenda is what will be the role of international institutions, leading international institutions, what will be the role of leading financial institutions in coping with food crisis, because it is inevitable and it is already next door, and international organizations and leading countries also should take care of situation with potential growth of migrants, which will be a consequence of food crisis. If we add here the situation of the energy markets, which is very unpredictable and which also leads to disparity between producers and consumers. And this is a risk also for producers. And if somebody thinks that countries, producers of oil and gas, are very happy with these high prices, it's wrong assessment. The balance of interest between producers, consumers, stable market, that's what producers really need. And the efforts of OPEC Plus, where Azerbaijan actively participates, were aimed at that. So all these are new challenges. What I'm saying now is absolutely different from what I was saying 6 months ago, sitting on this place. It shows that everything can change, everything changes, and nothing is stable. Of course, as a president of Azerbaijan, I work on the issues related to security of our country, and resolution of Karabakh conflict, I think it's an opportunity for security in the region, for peace in the region. Last time when we met, I broadly covered the issue of related to occupation, devastation, and humanitarian crisis, which our people suffered for almost 30 years. Don't want to repeat that. It is known already because so many visitors to liberated territories, politicians, public figures, journalists, representatives of civil society, and they see all with their own eyes what ruins were left after Armenian occupation. And last year, I'm grateful to Nizami Gencevi International Center that they organized one session in Shusha, and we had the opportunity to meet there. And I was actually working as a kind of a guide to our guests, showing them, the situation. Therefore, I want to express our approaches to post-war situation, to situation related to regional security in the Caucasus. Azerbaijan won the war was just, the war was inevitable, and it led to restoration of justice, international law, and national dignity of Azerbaijani people. Now we talk about peace. And I think it's one of the unique cases in the world that after such a long-lasting confrontation, within a short period of time, the country which restored justice and defeated aggressor offers peace. If you look at the history of wars, not in many cases one can see this picture. But why we select peace? Because we want stable, sustainable development in the Southern Caucasus. It's a unique opportunity. Southern Caucasus was disintegrated throughout the years of independence of free countries of Southern Caucasus. For 30 years, it was disintegrated because of Armenian occupation. So now it's a time to establish peace, establish cooperation, and Azerbaijan is working on that. With respect to process of normalization of relations with Armenia, we suggested, it was our proposal, to start working on peace agreement. Armenia did not respond. Then we made another step. We put forward 5 basic principles of international law, including respect to mutual respect and recognition of territorial integrity of both countries, and mutual refrain from any territorial claims now and in the future, and other principles which make the bulk of our proposal. And we were glad to see that Armenian government accepted these 5 principles. So this is a positive dynamics, but now we need to move to practical implementation, because we know from the history of times of occupation when we were negotiating that sometimes words, even on high level, articulated by Armenian officials do not mean a lot, because we need steps. And Azerbaijan already on its side established Azerbaijani Commission on peace agreement, and we expect the same to be done by Armenia. As soon as it is done, or if it is done, then negotiations will start. We also put forward a proposal to start the process of delimitation of our border, because biggest part of our border was also under occupation, and never delimitation took place. Therefore, this process also has started, and the first joint meeting of the border commissions of Azerbaijan and Armenia took place last month on the border. And that was also symbolic that both sides met on the border, and that was also an important message that there will be progress. Of course, we understand that it's a long way, but it started. At the same time, we expect that Armenia will comply with a trilateral declaration signed on November 10, 2020, with respect to the opening of communications for Azerbaijan to have connection with its autonomous Republic of Nakhchivan. Unfortunately, it's more than 1.5 years since Armenia signed the Capitulation Act, but so far there is no access. And this is unacceptable. First, this is a violation by Armenia of the provisions of trilateral declaration. And also, it creates a kind of a disbalance in the region, because based on the same declaration, Azerbaijan undertook obligation to provide unimpeded access from Armenia to Karabakh region of Azerbaijan, where Armenian population lives. So for 1.5 years, Armenians are using Lachin road to have this connection, unimpeded connection. But Azerbaijanis, they cannot use the road through Armenia, Zangezur corridor, to connect us with Nakhchivan. And this is not fair, and this is not just, and we will never agree with that. Therefore, I think that the deliberate delays from Armenian side of giving us this access is counterproductive. It reminds me of the times of negotiations where Armenia was delaying, and just winning time. And what was the result of that? The result was total defeat on the battlefield and on political arena. The result was that Armenian ideological basis was totally dismantled. And almost 30 years of occupation didn't make Armenian people happier. On the contrary, they have been known by the world community as occupants and aggressors. And after the war ended, now everybody can see what ruins they left during the times of occupation. Therefore, the soonest resolution of the opening of Zangezur corridor is one of the fundamental elements of future peace in the region. If we are not given this access, then it will be difficult to talk about peace. And all efforts of Azerbaijan aimed at normal coexistence and normal neighborhood with Armenia will fail. This is an important issue. Again, Azerbaijan has a right to demand it. Armenian government signed corresponding declaration. Second, Azerbaijan won the war as a country who suffered from occupation, and we have moral right to demand it. Another issue which I want to draw your attention is issues related to Armenians who live in Azerbaijan. I think that the declaration which was announced by President of European Council, Mr. Charles Michel, as a result of trilateral meeting in Brussels between President Michel, myself, and Prime Minister Pashinyan, clearly says that rights and security of Armenian population in Karabakh also will be taken into account. And we fully support it. And rights of security of all people of Azerbaijan are provided by our constitution. Azerbaijan is a multi-ethnic country, and Armenian population is not the biggest ethnic minority in Azerbaijan. Therefore, our constitution provides equal rights for representatives of all ethnicities, including Armenians who live in Azerbaijan for many years. Therefore, rights and security, yes, we will, of course, take care of that. But unfortunately, we start to hear from Armenian government words about status of so-called Nagorno-Karabakh, which is absolutely counterproductive and which is dangerous for Armenia itself, because Nagorno-Karabakh do not exist. Nagorno-Karabakh Autonomous District was abolished in the end of 1991 by the decision of Azerbaijani parliament, and we don't have this administrative structure on our territory. Therefore, any kind of reference to so-called status will lead only to new confrontation. Armenian government should understand it and should refrain from attempts to rewrite history. History already is here, and it was a kind of a verbal agreement that no one will talk about status. Unfortunately, it happens, and it can lead to very serious consequences. Because if Armenia continues to put under question Azerbaijan's territorial integrity, then Azerbaijan will have no other choice but also put under question Armenian territorial integrity. And from historical point of view, we have much more rights to do it, because the history of the last century clearly shows that in 1920, in November, 6 months after Sovietization of Azerbaijan, Soviet government took historical part of Azerbaijan, Zengezur, and adjusted it to Armenia. Therefore, if Armenia will demand the status for Armenians in Karabakh, why shouldn't Azerbaijanis demand status for Azerbaijanis in Western Zengezur? Because it was fully inhabited by Azerbaijanis. So this way will lead to a deadlock. And I think Armenian government should not forget the lessons of Second Karabakh War and learn that lesson well and refrain from any kind of territorial claims to Azerbaijan. Another issue which I also want you to know is also speculations about the activity of Minsk group. Minsk Group was created in 1992. The mandate was to help to resolve the conflict, but de facto activity led to zero result. Can you imagine, for 28 years, a group which has a mandate from OSCE did not produce any result. And therefore, after Azerbaijan resolved Karabakh conflict, the need for Minsk Group activity is no longer here. And we think that everybody understands it. Especially after Russian-Ukrainian war, it's clear that three co-chairs of the Minsk Group cannot get together. And we already received these messages that Minsk Group will not, the co-chair institute of this group will not function. In other words, Minsk Group is dysfunctional. Therefore, the attempts of revival also is counterproductive. I think the best way is to say goodbye to Minsk Group. Not thank you and goodbye, but only goodbye, because 30 years is enough. It's time for retirement. So I want also to express our position that any kind of speculations in Armenia or in any other country about Minsk Group lead only to irritation in Azerbaijan. We resolve the conflict. So-called Madrid principles, which were elaborated by Minsk Group, have been resolved. And now we need to think about how to normalize relations with Armenia, sign a peace agreement. I think we can, if both sides work in good faith, we can sign this peace agreement within 1 year. And then the peace will come to Caucasus, and our vision for Caucasus is integration, cooperation and integration. And Azerbaijan already made on several occasions proposals to start, to make a first step. We consulted this issue with our Georgian colleagues, and Georgian government also is supportive to this idea, to organize a trilateral meeting on the level of foreign ministers of Azerbaijan, Georgia, and Armenia in Georgia, and to start the dialogue. Unfortunately, Armenia refuses. I don't know what is the reason for that. I cannot find any explanation, any reasonable explanation. The same attempts were made, as far as I know, by some European institutions. Again, there was a refusal. If Armenia does not want to have peace in the Southern Caucasus, then there is a question, what do they want? If they want another war, it will be a catastrophe for them, and they clearly understand it. And I think the government and the revanchist forces in Armenia clearly understand that that will be the end of their statehood. Therefore, I think we need to get a clear answer from Armenia. How do they see the Southern Caucasus? Our position is clear. Position of Georgian government is clear. We want to start this dialogue, start interactions, and of course, without Armenia, it will not be possible. Especially taking into account the current situation, there is a need also to address issues of regional importance related to ecological protection, transboundary rivers which create a lot of pollution to Azerbaijan, issues related to transportation, new opportunities with respect to transit, especially taking into account that Azerbaijan is now coming closer to completion of its portion of the Zangezur corridor. The new routes, energy security also can be part of that. So I think it's time to start, because we lost 30 years. And if not for Armenian occupation, I think Southern Caucasus today would have been a very dynamic and modern and with bigger economic potential region. And a couple of words about energy security, because it's one of the urgent issues on the global agenda. Demand for Azerbaijani energy resources is growing. This February here in this Gülistan Palace, we held annual meeting of Southern Gas Corridor Advisory Council, and it was February 4th. And we're just planning our future steps, but the situation in Europe has changed dramatically. Therefore, the need for Azerbaijani hydrocarbons is growing, and we're trying to do all what we can in order to satisfy the growing demands from many countries. We received, during the last couple of months, requests from many European countries with respect to the gas supply. And of course, it's not easy because we first need to produce it. And we were not planning to increase gas production. Therefore, now we are working with the European Commission on this issue. We started energy dialogue with the European Commission, which covers not only gas, but also oil and electricity, hydrogen. There is a great potential in Azerbaijan in renewables, and we discussed it yesterday broadly with the members of the board, and we already started. We are planning to continue these efforts, and already more than 700 megawatts of wind and solar generation will be in operation within a year and a half. But this is only the beginning. The potential is much greater. Already we signed the preliminary agreements with respect to 4 gigawatts of renewable energy, and only potential of the Caspian Sea is 157 gigawatts. So it's a huge amount. Azerbaijan definitely, without any doubt, will transform into a green energy zone, will transform into a serious player on international energy markets with respect to renewables. Don't want to take much of your time. I want to conclude my comments and saying once again, welcome and thank you for being with us, and wish the forum success. I'm sure that will be the case as usual. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Excellency, for this far-reaching overview, and which really starts us well on our deliberations. A wonderful keynote address, and thank you again for that. May I now turn to Her Excellency Vaira Vike Freiberger, the co-chair of the NGIC, who may introduce a remark at this point. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Your Excellency, President Ilham Aliyev, Your Excellencies, Presidents, Prime Ministers, Ministers, representatives of international bodies, our colleagues, friends from across the world. We already have received a warm welcome from the President of the country who's host to the Nizami Ganjavi 9th Forum in Baku. And we thank Mr. President for his time and readiness to address this audience and to clarify the events that have been happening, very important historical events, since Azerbaijan was able to recover territory that it had lost for nearly half a century. And the hope that that gives to those who have lost their home, their country, and their territory is, of course, encouraging. But meanwhile, since the last forum that we had in November, we see situations of the reverse happening, of a brutal aggression of one country against another, for no apparent and logical reason except an imagined desire to reconstitute a long-gone empire that was put in place 350 years ago by Peter the Great. And Peter the Great, by the way, was bringing his country, Russia, a very backward one at the time, into Europe. He cut that country a window to Europe, which unfortunately included the countries, the Baltic countries, including Latvia, as part of it. And that 350 years is somehow chosen as a point of reference for creating a new world order. We are discussing at this forum, and we look forward to your input and solutions and proposed paths that we might follow in a situation where we see retrogression rather than progress, where we see injustice rather than international law and international order. We see supply routes being cut rather than new ones being created. We see the threat of increased poverty and, in fact, famine in parts of the world because of simply, one might say, grandiosity, exceptionalism, and in fact, a paranoid mania of grandeurs on the part of one country, which is having a domino effect and having such, not just destroying the cities and towns and villages of Ukraine and massacring its civilian population, and mishandling it in the most brutal way. We are seeing waves that are spreading across the world. We have with us here today Madame Rosalia, who is a former president of Ecuador, and it turns out that the banana growers in Ecuador are also affected by what is happening in Europe now. And so it goes for many other problems that we are facing in the world today. But the outline that we heard from President Aliyev, I think, sets the tone for looking at the crisis that we're facing. We're always facing some kind of crisis, but the current crisis is the one concerning the world order, and whether we are accepting the present and working with the givens of the present in order that we may move better into the future, or whether we look behind us and take on this retrograde movement by deciding to pick some period in history that seems to us more pleasing to the vanity and imagined grandeur of some leaders of some countries, rather than accepting the existing situation, which may involve injustices and wrongs done that need to be rectified, but to try and address it in a positive and forward-looking way. We have recently heard, after all the outlandish complaints that Russia has addressed to Ukraine, we have already heard from deputies of the Duma, who, as President Putin himself has told me, whoever listens to the deputies of the Duma, normally in a country one listens to the deputies, but of course in Russia that is not the case. Nevertheless, they express views, for instance, that the independence that Lithuania signed in agreement with the Russian Federation after the collapse of the Soviet Union is null and void. And here you have implications that, in other words, that the next country we're going to invade is going to be Lithuania, and I'm sure that Lithuanians, as we Latvians and all our closest neighbors, are very much really relieved to see themselves under the collective security protection of the NATO alliance, because these are not just idle remarks thrown off the cuff. This shows a certain attitude towards territories that at some historical time or another, on the periphery of a country, that God knows is huge, enormous already as it is not big enough to satisfy its ambitions of grandeur. And here we have a situation where I think the conflict and the tension between Azerbaijan and Armenia that is still awaits a continuation of the very positive steps recently undertaken and the normalization of the territorial situation. In many ways, this had been planned in the authoritarian system of the Soviet Union already in Stalin's time. The whole structure of the Soviet Union was to occupy as many territories surrounding the central core, which was Russia, or what is now the Russian Federation, and to make sure to implant, if you like, in each particular region some time bomb that would explode at a convenient time, or that could be encouraged to explode, in terms of creating animosity or conflicts between neighbors or near neighbors, with the idea that having the periphery in facing conflicts would allow the center to take control over it. This colonial attitude, of course, was in many ways adopted by other colonists throughout history, but as we saw across the world, decolonization of the great European powers that lost one after another of their former colonies, the year 1991 saw the breakup of the last big empire that had these territorial taken territories as part of their colonization process. And we are seeing now a revisionism, a way of trying to revive the idea of colonialism on the Eurasian continent, both in Europe, threatening certain parts of Central Asia and the Caucasus and elsewhere, which is extremely dangerous. Ladies and gentlemen, the security questions, the questions of world order and the ability for people to feel safe, the ability for countries to find progressive, mutually acceptable solutions to differences of opinion and historical claims that naturally can be, depending on which century you go back to, one side or the other might have an advantage. But the goodwill to engage in negotiations, as President Aliyev has underlined, the goodwill on the part of his country, I think, is an example of what is needed for progress to be made. We in Europe were very relieved to see how Monsieur Charles Michel, with his mediating role, was able to advance this situation. But mediation in terms of solving conflicts cannot be done over the heads of those who are concerned. We cannot have a solution to the conflict between Russia and Ukraine being done by leaders from whichever part of the world discussing with the president of Russia without the Ukrainian people having part of the discussions and without the will of the Ukrainian people being respected about the kind of future that they want for themselves and under what kind of orientation and alliances that they wish to belong to. The goodwill, in fact, is the absolute sine qua non of civil cohabitation between countries, between neighbors, between individuals. I remember as I soon took office, I started getting letters from the inhabitants with various problems that they had to solve. And I received a letter from a sister and a brother who had, after the return of private property and the collapse of communism and Russian occupation, they had inherited a house from their parents, but could not agree on how to divide the inheritance. And the brother wrote to me and said, I cannot get an agreement with my sister. I am going to saw that wooden house in half because I simply cannot live with that woman together under the same roof. When you have within a family, a single family, the inability to grow together and get an agreement, you can imagine how inevitable it is that the world will continue to have conflicts. It will continue to have crises, it will continue to have challenges, the kind that we have been addressing over the 8 previous Baku forums. Ladies and gentlemen, you who sit around this table have a great deal to contribute in terms of experience, knowledge, and creative ideas about how various problems can be solved. I therefore thank you all for being here with us. I particularly wish to thank President Aliyev for his support to the Nizami Ganjavi International Center without ever in any way whatsoever influencing or guiding its content or expressing criticism of the freedom of choice we have in terms of topics, persons invited, and so on. The Nizami Center has received complaints about its content from other countries than Azerbaijan, but that, of course, that is their business. We truly are grateful for this freedom of speech, freedom of thought, freedom of expression that the Baku Forum has always been known for, and I engage you to feel part of this family of people of goodwill who are ready to address the problems that need addressing with whatever tools and resources you have at your command. Thank you very much.
Thank you, President Vaira, and I will also take this occasion to thank President Aliyev for the space of freedom that he has provided for us over the years, both in the Global Baku Forum and in other meetings of the Nizami Ganjavi Center, where under his auspices we have always felt free to explore, to listen to a diversity of views, and to hopefully come up with sound ideas from people of experience and goodwill. Mr. President, if I may now turn to some of our most distinguished guests who are here, and I will call first of all on His Excellency Ilir Meta, President of the Republic of Albania. Mr. President.
Thank you very much. Dear President Aliyev, distinguished participants, it is always a great pleasure to participate in the Global Baku Forum and be part of this unique platform of distinguished personalities from all the sectors of governance, political and social life organized by Nizami Ganjavi International Center. Dear friends, we are living through tremendous changes. The world today is facing 2 current major challenges: the unprovoked and unjustified invasion of Ukraine by Russia, and the steps that need to be taken in a post-pandemic era. The war in Ukraine has impacted the entire world and has changed, in particular, also the European and NATO security environment. The impact of the war has been very strong, especially in terms of stability, energy supply, markets, price increase, but also increase of inflation, debts, etc. This conflict reminded everyone that freedom and sovereignty are not to be taken for granted. It was a reminder that leaders and states should not wait for the crisis to take place and react when they appear, but preventive measures must be in place, preparing ahead and foreseeing any possible scenario and future challenges. War in Ukraine had the opposite effect of what Russia expected at the beginning. It did not divide, but united the nations. The response was a global coalition in support of the peace-loving people and democratic institutions of Ukraine. Putin wanted less NATO, but he's getting more NATO, with more NATO presence in the eastern part of the alliance and also with more members in the future. This new geopolitical landscape deems as necessary a new approach by EU and NATO on enlargement and collective security. Enlargement should be considered a powerful geostrategic instrument. Today, close to 600 million Europeans live in a NATO country, with the alliance protecting about 93% of the European Union population. The conflict in Ukraine has raised the urgency for accession of the aspiring NATO and EU candidate countries. These actions would prevent the influence of third parties in certain fragile regions. In the Western Balkans, we are concerned on the interference of Russian proxies, intending to undermine the democracy and stability. The idea of a free and peaceful Europe is not complete without the Western Balkan states, which are key partners and integral members of the European family. In these times of challenges to security, stability and peace in Europe and the world, Albania, both as a NATO country and a non-permanent member of the United Nations Security Council, is determined in its positions in coherence with the Euro-Atlantic partners and allies, both at the European and global level. The conflict in Ukraine reminded us that freedom does not come for free, calling on to countries to increase their defense spending, and that economy and security must progress hand in hand. The consequences of war in Ukraine have caused rippling effects around the world on food supply, because Ukraine and Russia are among the world's breadbaskets, supplying 30% of wheat and 20% of maize to the world. Food pricing is #1 problem right now. By 2023, it very well will be a food availability problem, considering around 300 million people globally are already food acutely insecure according to the World Food Programme. All the Black Sea ports must be opened and functional, otherwise it will be a declaration of war on global food security, and it will result in hunger and destabilization and mass migration around the world. Hundreds of millions of people globally depend on food that comes through these ports. Leaders of the world must do every possible thing to bring the markets to stability before things get worse, because in the long term, global food prices will jump even more as a result of Russia's role as a leading producer of fertilizer needed for crops. The conflict has caused 5 million civilians to leave their country and more than 7 million people displaced within Ukraine. The United Nations has estimated that 13 million more Ukrainians are in the hardest hit areas. This is a humanitarian crisis, worsening at alarming speed, as well as a high risk in terms of security. In terms of natural resources and supplies, gas and energy, our continent and the world are facing big challenges, but also opportunities with the plans to cut purchases of Russian oil and natural gas in the near term. In this regard, I hope that the wisdom and experience of the distinguished members and participants of this forum will produce fruitful ideas and outcome on this matter. I take the opportunity to express once again my gratitude for the support provided by Azerbaijan and President Aliyev for the successful implementation of Trans-Adriatic Pipeline and Ionian Adriatic pipelines in Albania and our region. These projects take on even more significance now as an alternative energy source for the present and the future in our region and in Europe as well. Coming to the second issue, COVID-19 pandemics paralyzed the entire world, causing severe disruption to health systems, economies and societies all over the world. But human resilience, the collaboration between nations, the multilateralism approach to combat the pandemics brought the world back to normality. Yet there are so many lessons to be learned and so many challenges to face in the post-pandemic era, considering that about half the world's population still lacks access to essential health services. The pandemic taught us that when health is at risk, everything is at risk, and isolation is not possible. No country is immune, despite its size or strength, and health is not just a national issue, but an international issue. Improvement of the global public health is an urgency in order to prevent any possible future pandemics. A better global coordination is needed for the early warning systems and transmission tracking, the sharing of vaccines, medication and equipment, reallocation of vitally important medical products and equipment, as well as interstate cooperation in the field of healthcare, medical research and biotechnology. Albania's priority as a member of the United Nations Security Council is to contribute in strengthening World Health Organization as the leading and directing authority on global health at the center of the global health architecture. Dear colleagues, let us never take our eyes off democracy, for it must be protected at all times. It is not a gift given once and for all, but must be consolidated through constant commitment. In addition, the well-being of nations depends on the respect for human rights and creation of good standards of living. Confronting climate change is also a duty that needs to be fulfilled by every country. The energy crisis should not divert us from carbon emission targets. Distinguished and honorable participants, the threats that humanity is facing are reaching new peaks. But despite all these challenges, we carry the knowledge of the past, that in every situation, difficulty or crisis, the human spirit and the unity of nations have always emerged victorious and triumphant. In the hour of adversity, be not without hope, for crucial rain falls from black clouds, wrote Nizami Ganjavi. This hope for a better future has motivated humanity throughout the history, and by joint efforts and goodwill, we will overcome any challenges. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Your Excellency, President Ilia Meta. May I now turn to His Excellency Šefik Zaverović, Chairman of the Presidency of Bosnia and Herzegovina. The floor is yours.
Poštovani predsjedniče Alijev, poštovano rukovodstvo Međunarodnog centra Nizami Ganđavi, dragi prijatelji, dame i gospodo. Čini mi posebnu čast biti danas s vama na otvaranju globalnog Baku foruma, koji ove godine nosi naziv Izazovi za globalni poredak. Zahvaljujem Međunarodnom centru Nizami Ganđavi na pozivu i toplom gostoprinstvu u Baku. Poštovani predsjedniče Alijev, želim vam uspjeh u obnovi i rekonstrukciji Karabaha, želim vam uspjeh u punoj implementaciji sporazuma postignutog nakon drugog rata i želim vam uspjeh u zaštiti teritorijalnog integriteta Azerbejdžana u skladu s međunarodnim pravom. Poštovane dame i gospodo, koji su to izazovi za globalni svjetski poredak? Da bismo odgovorili na to pitanje, moramo razmotriti naše ponašanje u globalnim svjetskim krizama, kao što su, na primjer, migracije, pandemija, agresija na Ukrajinu. Posljedice globalnih kriza snosimo svi globalno, iako za njih nismo svi jednako odgovorni. Šta uraditi da bi se krize prevenirale ili pak izbjegle ili ublažile štetne posljedice? Odgovor je logičan i jednostavan, ali nažalost, zbog svijeta kakav danas jeste, teško ostvariv. Svi znamo da je odgovor u većoj pravdi, jedinstvu, solidarnosti, međunarodnom pravu i snažnim i djelotvornim multilateralnim mehanizmima. Međutim, nikako da to ostvarimo. Nakon svake krize kažemo nikada više, a one se stalno ponavljaju. I to one za koje je odgovoran čovjek. Zbog toga, koristeći autoritet BAKU foruma, moramo stalno isticati ove stvari i biti uporni u borbi za bolji svijet. Dame i gospodo, ovaj dio svijeta sličan je dijelu svijeta odakle dolazim. I Kavkaz i Balkan su raskršća, mjesta na kojima se dodiruju različiti svjetovi. Često su ta mjesta, nalazeći se na razdjelnicama velikih carstava, bila poprišta sukoba, ali istovremeno su bila i mjesta susreta civilizacija i kultura. Upravo su zahvaljujući tim susretima na ovim mjestima kreirane nove paradigme. Bosna i Hercegovina je jedna takva paradigma. Moja država ne spada u red velikih svjetskih država, ali je izuzetno značajna država, čak i u globalnim okvirima, upravo po svojoj paradigmi. Već stoljećima u Bosni i Hercegovini žive zajednice koje pripadaju različitim kulturno-civilizacijskim krugovima, islamskom, rimokatoličkom, pravoslavnom, jevrejskom i tako dalje. Kroz svoju historiju Bosna i Hercegovina se izgrađivala kao zajednica različitosti, razvijajući posebne društvene prakse i institute, kakvi su bili nepoznati monoetničkim društvima. Poznavanje i poštivanje tuđih vjerskih i tradicijskih običaja, zatim kulturni sinkretizam i druge prakse postali su vremenom sastavni dio bosansko-hercegovačkog identiteta kojim se ljudi u Bosni i Hercegovini ponose. Zadnjih nekoliko decenija, kroz globalizaciju, velike ekonomske migracije i druge procese, desilo se nešto neočekivano. Multietničnost, koja se mnogima činila kao devijacija specifična za Bosnu i Hercegovinu i Balkan, postala je karakteristika razvijenih modernih društava. Sada je sasvim normalno da u jednom društvu žive ljudi svih rasa i brojnih kultura. Cijeli svijet je postao raskršće. Više nije pitanje da li naša društva mogu i trebaju biti multietnična, jer ona to već jesu. Jedino je pitanje kako organizirati život u njima u korist svih njihovih članova. Isto što važi za društva u svijetu, važi i za svijet u cjelini kao globalno društvo. Dragi prijatelji, globalni poredak, kakav smo poznavali u proteklim decenijama, bio je utemeljen po okončanju Drugog svjetskog rata kao protuteža nacističkom projektu koji je ciljao da uništi multietnička društva, iskorijeni ili porobi čitave narode, te međunarodne odnose uredi na principu sile i dominacije. Svijest o tome da su svi krajevi svijeta međuovisni, te da se regionalne krize mogu pretvoriti u svjetske požare, nagnala je međunarodnu zajednicu da utvrdi globalne institucije i poredak zasnovan na pravilima. Misija Ujedinjenih nacija, definirana u osnivačkim aktima, jeste da se osigura međunarodni mir uz dijalog, toleranciju i pluralističku svijest. Danas, kada nakon iskustva pandemije i agresije na Ukrajinu govorimo o izazovima za globalni poredak, konstatujemo nemogućnost multilateralnih institucija da odgovore izazovima epohe. Svjedočimo kršenju međunarodnog prava. Ono što ne trebamo zaboraviti jeste da ovaj proces nije započeo sada. Najveći krah nakon Drugog svjetskog rata Ujedinjene nacije su doživjele upravo u Bosni i Hercegovini u periodu od 1992. do 1995. godine. Po prvi put od osnivanja UN-a na evropskom tlu je pokrenut rat, čiji je cilj bio nasilno otimanje dijela teritorije Bosne i Hercegovine i istrebljenje bošnjačkog naroda kao zajednice koja je trebala biti zaštićena Konvencijom o sprečavanju i kažnjavanju genocida. Na samom početku rata Vijeće sigurnosti Ujedinjenih nacija nametnulo je nepravedan embargo na uvoz oružja u Bosni i Hercegovini, čime nas je spriječilo da ostvarimo svoje pravo na samoodbranu propisano poveljom Ujedinjenih nacija. Istovremeno, Ujedinjene nacije nisu stale u zaštitu Bosne i Hercegovine, svoje punopravne članice, koja je bila izložena brutalnoj agresiji iz susjedstva. Činjenica da su tokom više od 3,5 godine masovni zločini u Bosni i Hercegovini bili vršeni u prisustvu vojnih snaga Ujedinjenih nacija, UNPROFOR-a, ruiniralo je kredibilitet ove najveće svjetske organizacije. Na koncu, u julu 1995. godine, uprkos prisustvu UNPROFOR-a, izvršen je genocid u Srebrenici, najveći masakr na evropskom tlu nakon Drugog svjetskog rata, u kojem je za samo nekoliko dana ubijeno više od 8.000 ljudi. Činjenica da su institucije međunarodnog poretka, prvenstveno Vijeće sigurnosti, imale mogućnost da preveniraju genocid u Srebrenici, ali da to nisu učinile usred neodlučnosti, ostavilo je trajne posljedice na kredibilitet Ujedinjenih nacija. Najveći poraz Ujedinjenih nacija danas vidim u tome što više niko od njih ni ne očekuje da zaustave agresiju na Ukrajinu i zločine protiv civilnog stanovništva. Usvajanje rezolucije Generalne skupštine Ujedinjenih nacija o osudi agresije u Ukrajini je značajan akt, ali ako su njome iscrpljene mogućnosti Ujedinjenih nacija, onda nema nikakve sumnje da se sistem mora reformirati. Međunarodni mir i nepovredivost granica suverenih država ne mogu biti taoci veta privilegiranih država. Dragi prijatelji, u iščekivanju reforme sistema Ujedinjenih nacija kao dugoročnog i sveobuhvatnog rješenja moramo misliti i o trenutnim rješenjima. U vezi s tim pozvaću se ponovo na iskustvo Bosne i Hercegovine. Dejtonski mirovni sporazum kojim je okončan rat u Bosni i Hercegovini potpisan je nakon intervencije NATO saveza na osnovu rezolucije Vijeća sigurnosti, te je proveden zahvaljujući prisustvu NATO trupa i djelovanju međunarodne zajednice na civilnom planu, prvenstveno kroz Ured visokog predstavnika kao institucije kojoj je dato pravo da poništava akte protivne Dejtonskom sporazumu i sankcionira zvaničnike koji krše ovaj sporazum. Tokom 27 godina implementacije Dejtonskog sporazuma, visoki predstavnik djeluje uz podršku Vijeća za implementaciju mira, kojega bira i podnosi izvještaje Vijeću sigurnosti, ispunjavajući obaveze iz poglavlja 7 Povelje Ujedinjenih nacija, koje govori o akcijama međunarodne zajednice u svrhu očuvanja mira. Djelotvornost međunarodne zajednice u Bosni i Hercegovini pokazala se proteklih mjeseci kada su vlasti entiteta Republika Srpska pokrenule niz secesionističkih aktivnosti, nastojeći urušiti državne institucije koje su prema Ustavu potrebne za očuvanje suvereniteta i teritorijalnog integriteta, kao što su jedinstvene oružane snage, pravosuđe, poreski sistem i drugo. Članice Vijeća za implementaciju mira uvele su sankcije odgovornima za secesionističke aktivnosti, a visoki predstavnik je koristio svoje ovlasti i poništavao akte koji su protivni Dejtonskom sporazumu, čime je dat presudan doprinos stabilizaciji stanja. Zahvaljujući multilateralnoj akciji i djelovanju sistema međunarodne zajednice, spriječen je najgori scenarij, prelijevanje rata iz Ukrajine na područje Bosne i Hercegovine. Ali, da bi se osigurala dugoročna stabilnost, bit će nam potrebno još mnogo opreza, mudrosti i povrh svega odlučnosti. Dragi prijatelji, o izazovima za globalni poredak uglavnom sam govorio kroz primjer svoje zemlje, jer je na primjeru Bosne i Hercegovine jasno vidljivo da kada multilateralni mehanizmi ispunjavaju svoju misiju, stvari idu naprijed i da se mir može zaštititi. Hvala vam na pažnji.
Thank you, Mr. President. I now have the honor of calling on Her Excellency President Salome Zurabishvili, President of Georgia.
Mr. President, Excellencies, distinguished participants, it is an honor and a great pleasure addressing you today here, and I thank for that the Nizamına International Center for hosting the IX Qlobal Bakı Forum during what is a very critical moment of our time. today, and maybe at different conferences, we used to say that even in earlier years, but today the world is really facing unprecedented challenges. And at such a time, it's extremely important to have such gatherings, to hold open and frank discussions, to open new avenues. In February this year, the world witnessed a war at the heart of Europe, a war that was caused by the Russian Federation when it started its brutal, unprovoked, unjustified invasion of Ukraine, and which has caused a tragedy already, one of the worst probably humanitarian crises, economic destruction, and senseless loss of lives. As we witness this tragedy and the horrors of the human toll caused by this war, the Georgians cannot but not remember the Russian military aggression in 2008, but also in 1991, but also in 1921, and earlier when it was the Russian Empire. And it expresses their complete solidarity toward the Ukrainian people for their incredible resistance, men and women together, and their resolve in defending not only their sovereignty, their territorial integrity, but also the fundamental values of freedom, peace, and security, all the cornerstone values of our international world order. At a time when everything is challenged, not only the border and the respect for established borders, not only the territorial integrity, but international law, law in war, human rights, civilian rights in war and at war, everything there seems to be forgotten. And that is a challenge for all of us. As Russia continues to drag further this war, the world, which has yet to recover from the pandemic and the global supply chain shortages, risks facing even more economic consequences, energy insecurity, and food shortages. In addition, the war has further exacerbated the lingering global challenges, such as climate change, which we have no capacity now to concentrate upon, the erosion in general of multilateralism, which had started before but which has accelerated, the spread of hate speech and polarization, which is our common illness to all of us. And I'm naming just a few. When we're discussing challenges to the global world order, I cannot but not return to the Caucasus, which in a way is a small resume of what's happening now. We, as it was mentioned here by Mrs. Vika Freiberg, we have seen directly the consequences of policy of the Soviet Empire, which was to leave these time bombs on our territories and to try, as soon as we would become independent, to start fighting with each other. But that's not only what happened to us. We have also been confronted to the very difficult fact that you have a very potent neighbor, very powerful, that doesn't understand neighborhood, that doesn't understand the neighborly relations, that is not ready for dialogue, and that thinks until today, and that's what we see in Ukraine, that you can use force to resolve all the conflicts or to satisfy all your ambitions, including when those ambitions belong to the past centuries and not to the 21st century. So these challenges are something that we know very well. In the case of Georgia, we know it very clearly today because we have 20% of the country, that territory, that is occupied. And occupation is something that is an everyday reminder because we see constantly the delimitation, non-border being displaced. We see hostage-taking, and we see other kinds of threats like we have just seen, talking about a referendum that would lead to pure and blatant annexion of those territories. To that, we answer with a unilateral declaration that we are not one that will start a war to reconquer these territories, because what we want is to reunite the populations that live on both sides of the occupied territories. And that's a very strong statement that we have made, despite the fact that in those occupied territories, following the war in Ukraine, there were thoughts or fears that were probably fueled by Russia itself, that Georgia might attempt to use these circumstances to reconquer territories. No, we won't, because we want reunification with populations, and we do not want to use war. And that's a message also for Russia. If we want to have neighborly relations all around you, which today is not the case, the only way is dialogue, and it's never the use of force, and it will never be the use of force. The South Caucasus, for that, is a very central place. Our duty, clearly, is to give back to this region its historic and its future role, which is that of being a place of security, stability, and being a bridge between Europe, to which we are aspiring ourselves, and we are waiting today a very important decision of the European Commission, a link with this Europe and the other part, Caspian Sea, Central Asia. This very central strategic region, that's probably the reason why it has been so often the ambition of many empires to conquer and control this region. This strategic region can only transform itself and develop itself if it's a region of peace and stability. Hence, it's very important that peace, stability, and cooperation this is central for us, this is central for European Union, and it's central for the normal connections that we need in this 21st century, which is a century of connectivity and not of division, even if some have not understood that. As we represent this natural transit bridge of goods that have to flow between Europe and Asia, we have to also achieve more cooperation between ourselves, and I want here to also remind of this project of trilateral cooperation between the three Caucasus countries, because the Caucasus belongs to us, and we have to find the forms and the manners to really bring this cooperation to a new stage. In this light, I highly welcome the EU's engagement in the peace talks and the confidence-building process between Azerbaijan and Armenia, because if there is something that the EU knows and has proven, is that it can resolve conflicts between the nations that constitute Europe today, that it can preserve this peace for so many decades. Now it has been something that is a major achievement, and that is the achievement that makes us the neighbors, the associated trio today, Moldova, Ukraine, and Georgia, that makes us look towards European Union, because we see and we value this achievement. And in order for the EU to play an instrumental role in long-standing peace and stability in its immediate neighborhood, the European bloc needs to continue on one side pushing to end the war in Ukraine, to end the war, of course, with the full, and I also agree with that, full participation of the Ukrainians. The price that has been paid by the Ukrainian population means that they, and only they, can decide when, how, and what form the peace, which is vital for them and for all of us, but what form it should take. And the EU should be supporting the European aspirations of the countries that are already candidates, like in the Western Balkans, or those that are associated, because that's a way to expand the stability, the security, and the prosperity that it has achieved for the 27 countries that are part today of the European Union. The tragic war in Ukraine has once again demonstrated the need to act together and to support one another in these difficult and challenging times. If one positive outcome could be drawn from this outrageous war, is that the international community has demonstrated its capability to stand in unison against blatant aggression and anachronistic geopolitical ambitions. However, more needs to be done. It is crucial now that we reflect on the shortcomings of the international community and find new formats, new opportunities to overcome the obstacles that hinder the peaceful and harmonious coexistence of our global community. To this end, as one small but new format, tomorrow Tbilisi will be hosting a Women's International Conference on Peace and Security, which aims at establishing a new space for women leaders, not only political leaders, but of all fields, to discuss what could be a different role of women in preserving global peace and security amid changing world order and more challenges. I strongly believe that women possess untapped resources in facing conflicts, more maybe innovative minds to try to find new solutions. And it is time for them to take the leadership stance in this emerging global landscape. In the end, I'm confident that we will all unite towards protecting our common values and principles that lay the foundation for international cooperation. And I would like once again to thank the organizer for hosting this forum, and I would like to wish you all successful and productive discussions. Thank you all.
Thank you, Madam President. Let me now call on Dr. Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus, Director General of the World Health Organization, who has been guiding us through the greatest pandemic that the world has seen in almost a century. Dr. Tedros.
Thank you, moderator and co-chair of the board, Your Excellency, President Aliyev, Your Excellency Vaira Friebarga, Secretary General Rovshan Muradov, Excellencies, honorable NGIC members, dear colleagues and friends. I thank Your Excellency President Aliyev for the invitation, and my thanks also to the Nizami Ganjavi International Center for your support to WHO and for our joint mission. I still regret that I was not able to be here in person last year to receive the 2021 Nizami Ganjavi International Award, but I was no less humbled and honored to receive it virtually. And I'm delighted to be with you in person this year. The fact that we are able to meet face to face is testament that after 2 long years, we have turned the tide against the COVID-19. I'm very pleased to see that reported cases and deaths are here in Azerbaijan are at the lowest levels since the beginning of the pandemic. Globally, the number of reported COVID-19 cases and deaths continue to decline. On average, about 3/4 of health workers and people aged over 60 globally have been vaccinated. But it's far too soon to declare victory. Increasing transmission, coupled with lower rates of testing and sequencing, is fertile ground for a new and more virulent variant to emerge that evades our vaccines. And 1 billion people remain unvaccinated, mostly in low-income countries in Africa and elsewhere. Of course, the pandemic is not the only crisis in our world. We face a formidable convergence of disease, drought, famine, and war, fueled by climate change, inequality, and geopolitical rivalry. To address these challenges, WHO is focusing on 3 main actions. First, we must end the pandemic. We call on all countries to remain vigilant. We call on all countries to maintain testing and sequencing. And we call on all countries to continue vaccinating with a focus on health workers, older people, and other at-risk groups. Second, all countries must invest in resilient health systems. The pandemic has demonstrated that health is not simply an outcome of development. It's also the means. In particular, WHO calls on all countries to make a radical reorientation of health systems towards primary health care, with a focus on promoting health and preventing disease. Third, we must learn the lessons the pandemic is teaching us by building a stronger global architecture for health emergency preparedness and response that's equitable, inclusive, and coherent. WHO has developed a proposal with 10 key recommendations for stronger governance, stronger systems and tools, stronger financing, and a stronger WHO at the center of the global health architecture, as His Excellency President Mehta had said earlier. WHO has the overarching these recommendations is the need for a new international accord or treaty on pandemic preparedness and response, which countries are now negotiating. I look forward to presenting our proposal in more detail at tomorrow's session on global health governance. Last century, the horrors of 2 world wars gave birth to the realization that the only answer to global conflict is global cooperation. The COVID-19 pandemic, more than any crisis since the Second World War, has shown why that remains the case. As you may know, I visited Ukraine, Kyiv, and other areas recently, And since the invasion of Ukraine by Russia, we're witnessing major crises, as many of you have outlined, energy, food, and the rest. And WHO is also concerned. Health could be another major crisis because we're not out of the pandemic, but the food, energy, and other crises could also have impact on our health conditions globally. In our increasingly polarized world, we must all work to find ways to build bridges, not fences, and to learn the painful lessons the pandemic has taught us and the war, the lessons that this war is teaching us, and build together a healthier, safer, and fairer future. I'm surprised actually by the same choice we have with the President of Albania on a quote from Nizami Ganjavi. It's independent, we haven't spoken about that, but it was in my speech and I heard him say it. So in the words of Nizami Ganjavi, in the hour of adversity, be not without hope, for crystal rain falls from black clouds. So thank you so much, and back to you, Chair.
Thank you, Dr. Tedros. May I now call on His Excellency Binali Yildirim, Prime Minister of Turkey, 2016 to 18, Speaker of the Grand Assembly, who is delivering Turkey's message on behalf of President Recep Erdoğan. Mr. Yildirim, floor is yours.
Evet, teşekkür ederim değerli başkan. Sözlerimin başında bize bu sıcak ev sahipliğini gösteren başta Cenab-ı Prezident Sayın Aliyev ve şükranlarımı sunuyorum. Ve Nicami Gencevi Uluslararası Merkezi'nin geleneksel hale getirdiği bu toplantıda bulunmaktan memnuniyet duyduğumu ifade ediyor ve düzenleyen başta zatınız İsmail Bey ve Bayan Cumhurbaşkanı Freiberge'ye teşekkür ediyorum davetler için. Sözlerimin başında Cumhurbaşkanımızın selamlarını ve sevgilerini iletiyorum. Değerli konuklar, özellikle küresel tehditlerle dengeli ve kapsayıcı bir mücadele şarttır. Küresel güvenliğin, istikrarın, barışın, refahın ve dengeli kalkınmanın sağlanması bütün insanlığın huzurunun ve refahının sağlanmasıyla ancak mümkündür. Birleşmiş Milletler 2. Dünya Savaşı'ndan sonra oluşturulmuş ve o günün ihtiyaçlarına göre bir daha asla savaş çıkmasın düşüncesiyle kurulmuştur. Ancak geçen süre içerisinde dünyada çok büyük değişiklikler yaşandı. Soğuk Savaş sona erdi. Sovyetler Birliği dağıldı ve birçok bağımsız ülke dünya sahnesinde yerini aldı. Bu şartlar altında Birleşmiş Milletler'in kuruluşundaki 5 daimi üye ve veto hakkı o gün küresel sorunların çözümünde belki fayda sağlıyor idi, ancak bugün bunu yapmaktan uzak bir noktaya gelmiştir. Maalesef Birleşmiş Milletler küresel sorunlara barışçıl çözümler üretmek konusunda etkin katkı sağlayamaz durumdadır. O yüzden de Sayın Cumhurbaşkanımızın ısrarla dünya 5'ten büyüktür söylemi bugün eskisine göre daha güncel ve acil bir durum haline gelmiştir. Bunların birçok örnekleri vardır. Örneğin Sayın Cumhurbaşkanı İlham Aliyev Bey'in ifade ettiği gibi Karabağ meselesi 26 yıl boyunca Birleşmiş Milletler kararları, AGİT, Minsk üçlüsü gibi diplomatik organizasyonlar marifetiyle çözüm üretilmeye çalışılmış ancak hiçbir netice alınamamıştır. Ta ki Azerbaycan'ın 44 günlük zafer mücadelesinde işgal altındaki topraklarını kendi imkan ve kabiliyetleriyle tekrar elde etmesi gibi. Kafkasları, Asya'yı ve Avrupa'yı bir barış bölgesi haline getirmek hepimizin hedefi olmalıdır. Sovyetlerin dağılmasından sonra Güneydoğu Avrupa, Balkanlarda yaşananlar, Orta Doğu'da yaşananlar, şimdilik Kuzey Afrika'da ve en son Karadeniz'in kuzeyinde, Ukrayna ve Rusya'da meydana gelen çatışmalar bir kez daha insanlığın sorumluluğunu savaştan yana değil, barıştan yana bütün imkanları seferber etmesinin gerekliliğini ortaya koyuyor. Değerli katılımcılar, bu bağlamda mevcut uluslararası kuruluşların demokratik bir reforma tabi tutulması artık bir zaruriyet haline almıştır. Türkiye, Asya ile Avrupa arasında, Avrasya coğrafyasında tam da bütün istikrarsızlıkların, çatışmaların, göç yollarının, enerji yollarının ve ulaştırma koridorlarının üzerinde bulunan bir ülkedir. Biz 40 yıl süreyle terörle mücadele eden ve büyük bedeller ödeyen ülkeyiz. Bunun üzerine 10 yılda Suriye'deki iç savaştan kaynaklı mülteci sorunuyla karşı karşıyayız. Bugünlerde Rusya-Ukrayna çatışmasında Avrupalı dostlarımızın yaşadığı sıkıntıları biz 10 yıl boyunca yaşıyoruz ve ümit ederiz ki bu günlerde bizim yaşadığımız mülteci krizini, terör tehditlerini daha iyi anlayacaklardır. Kafkaslar, Güney Kafkasya bir barış, istikrar, huzur bölgesi olmalıdır. Bunun yolu da geçtiğimiz yıl 44 günlük zafer mücadelesiyle açılmıştır ve üçlü anlaşma çerçevesinde hem Laçin koridoru, eş zamanlı olarak Zengezur koridoruyla Kafkaslardan Orta Asya'ya, Anadolu coğrafyası üzerinden de Avrupa'ya erişimin sağlanması ve çatışma yerine refahın, kalkınmanın, bölgesel huzurun sağlanması için olmazsa olmazdır. Bugün küresel sorunlardaki en büyük problemimiz güvendir. Güven aşınması sebebiyle, alınan kararların hayata geçirilememesi sebebiyle maalesef bölgesel ve uluslararası kuruluşlar kredilerini gün geçtikçe kaybetmeye görülmektedir. 2 yıl boyunca dünya birbiriyle irtibatını kaybetti pandemiden dolayı. Şimdi az önce başkanın ifade ettiği gibi büyük ölçüde normalleşme olmakla beraber hala Afrika ağırlıklı tehdit devam ediyor. Ve bu pandeminin bize bıraktığı miras en önemlisi dünya küçülmeye başladı. Nüfusumuz arttığı halde dünyanın geliri, gayri safi hasılası azalmaya başladı. Bu da insanların fakirleşmesi demektir. Fakirleşmenin de bölgesel ve küresel birçok sorunu beraberinde getirdiği aşikardır. Tam bu meselenin üzerinde geldik derken önümüzde yeni bir sorun, Rusya-Ukrayna arasındaki savaş. Elbette ki her bir ülke diğer ülkenin toprak bütünlüğü ve egemenliğine mutlak saygı göstermek zorundadır. Dolayısıyla savaşlarla, işgallerle sorunlara çözüm üretilmesi mümkün değildir. O yüzden Türkiye olarak biz diyoruz ki dostlukları arttıralım, düşmanlıkları azaltalım, bölgemizde ve dünyada krizleri aşıp barışı ve refahı adil bir şekilde yayılmasını sağlayalım. Bunun en güzel örneğini geçtiğimiz yıllarda Sayın Cumhurbaşkanı İlham Aliyev, Gürcistan Cumhurbaşkanı ve Cumhurbaşkanımız Recep Tayyip Erdoğan'ın bir araya gelerek ortaya koydukları BAKU-Tiflis-Kars demiryolu bağlantısı ve devamında TANAP gaz projesi ve oradan da Avrupa'ya devam edecek TAP projesiyle enerji arz güvenliğini sağlayan önemli bir adım atılmıştır. Bugünlerde Karadeniz'in kuzeyinde yaşanan sorunlar bir kez daha göstermiştir ki tarihi İpek yolu uzak doğudan başlayan Orta Asya ülkelerini Hazar'ı kat edip Azerbaycan üzerinden Kafkasya'ya ve oradan Avrupa'ya uzanan bu yol hem refahın hem göçün hem de medeniyetlerin hicret ettiği doğudan batıya, batıdan doğuya kat ettiği önemli bir güzergah olmuştur. Bazen bölgesel organizasyonların fonksiyonları ve önemleri yanlış yorumlanmaktadır. Birçok bölgesel işbirliği organizasyonları vardır. Avrupa Birliği, Arap Birliği, İslam İşbirliği Teşkilatı, Şangay Beşlisi, Avrasya Ekonomi Birliği ve bir de Türk Devletleri Teşkilatı. Birkaç cümle Türk Devletleri Teşkilatı'ndan bahsetmek isterim. Türk Devletleri Teşkilatı, Sovyetler Birliği'nin dağılmasından sonra Kafkaslar'da ve Orta Asya'da bulunan bağımsız Türk devletlerinin oluşturduğu bir yapıdır. Bu teşkilata Azerbaycan, Türkiye, Kırgızistan, Kazakistan, Özbekistan, Türkmenistan ve Macaristan gözlemci üye olarak iştirak etmektedir. 170 milyon nüfusu temsil edip küresel gelirden 1,5 trilyon payı olan ve 4,5 milyon kilometre karelik bir bölgeyi teşkil ediyor. Bu birliğin amacı en son İstanbul'da yapılan 8. zirvede Sayın Cumhurbaşkanı İlham Aliyev'in ve Sayın Cumhurbaşkanımızın da teklifiyle teşkilatın danışma organı olan Aksakallar heyeti başkanı olarak da beni uygun gördüler. Bu çerçevede Türk geleneğinde önemli yeri olan Aksakallar olarak biz amacımız Kafkaslar'da, Orta Asya'da ve Anadolu coğrafyasında hatta Balkanlar'da 1,5 milyona hitap eden nüfusun savaşlardan uzak dayanışma içerisinde hem ulaşım entegrasyonu hem enerji entegrasyonu ve ülkeler arasındaki engellerin, ticaretin gelişmesine yönelik engellerin kaldırılması, kültürel işbirliklerinin, gençlik teşkilatlarının gençler arasındaki işbirliğinin geliştirilmesi gibi görevler ifa etmenin gayreti içerisindeyiz. Amacımız küresel barışa, refaha olabildiğince katkı sağlamak yönündedir. Sözlerime son vermeden önce şunu ifade etmek istiyorum. Bir an önce Ukrayna'da devam eden savaşın sona ermesi insanlık için hayati öneme sahiptir. Çünkü pandemiden sonra normale döndük derken büyük bir gıda kriziyle, küresel gıda kriziyle karşı karşıyayız. Çünkü bu iki ülke, Ukrayna ve Rusya, tek başına dünyanın bütün tahıl ihtiyacının 1/3'ünü karşılıyor. Şimdi artık bu imkan neredeyse ortadan kalkmış durumda. Ayrıca milyonlarca mülteci Avrupa ülkelerinde göç etmek zorunda kaldı ve insanlık büyük bir bedel ödüyor. Bu bakımdan masum çocuklar, sivil insanlar bu savaşların bedelini ödememeli ve bunun için bu ve buna benzer organizasyonlar hayati önem taşıyor. Birbirlerimizle daha çok konuşmamız lazım. Daha az ihtilaf olması lazım. Hatta hiç savaş olmaması en ideal insanlık için çözümdür. Savaş gözyaşıdır, kandır ve savaş ayrışmaların temel kaynağıdır. Bu duygu ve düşüncelerle özellikle Nizami Gencevi Uluslararası Merkez'in geleneksel hale getirdiği bu önemli toplantıda birbirinden değerli, dünyanın değişik ülkelerinde üst düzey başbakanlık, cumhurbaşkanlığı, bakanlık ve akademik camiada sorumluluk almış değerli insanların görüşlerini ortaya koyması ve burada oluşan sonuçlardan bölgesel ve küresel barışa bir katkı sağlanması en büyük arzumuzdur, isteğimizdir. Bu vesileyle bir kez daha organizasyonu yapan Nizami Gencevi Enstitüsü yöneticilerine teşekkür ediyorum ve bizi burada ağırlayan Azerbaycan değerli Başkanı Cenab İlham Aliyev'e şükranlarımı sunuyorum. Saygılarımla.
Thank you, Your Excellency, Mr. Yildirim. And I now call on Her Excellency Tatiana Valovaya, Under-Secretary General of the United Nations, Director General of the United Nations Office at Geneva. Excellency, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Your Excellency President Aliyev, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, dear friends, for me it's a great honor and a great pleasure to address the Global Baku Forum, a renowned international platform, and to discuss the most pressing issues on the global agenda. I wish to sincerely thank His Excellency President Aliyev for his warm welcome and hospitality, and of course Nizami Gencevi International Center for organizing the 9th edition of the forum. I am also really happy to be back, physically back to Baku, a modern city with ancient history, which I visited many times before, and I am looking forward to discovering its transformations. It was already said by many previous speakers that the world is facing the most serious security and geopolitical crisis since the Second World War. And unfortunately, that's not the only crisis. Our world today is facing multiple and interlinked global crises, with many countries around the world suffering from cascading challenges of climate emergency and uneven recovery from COVID-19 pandemic and a triple crisis of food, energy and debt. The tragic consequences of ongoing war in Ukraine have exacerbated these interlinked crises and contributed to sky-high food and energy prices with serious implications for the global financial and economic and social systems. In the face of these multiplying global challenges, the current global order and the system of international cooperation with the United Nations as its core, is under severe stress. The theme of our timely and important event explores these and other global challenges. But I would like for us to look not only and reflect not only on the challenges, but focus on the future, on the establishment of a new global order. Because we have to admit, the world is currently going through a transition to a new social and economic paradigm, to a new global order. Such transformations happen once in several centuries, and in the past were always accompanied by social upheavals, wars, recessions, and other shocks. And the current state of the world, unfortunately, shows that we are still undergoing among these shocks. But the humanity can and should minimize the negative consequences. The humanity can and should work for a new economic and social paradigm. It's difficult still to give the dimension of this new paradigm, but we can give the dimension of a social and economic paradigm the peoples of the United Nations wish and desire. It's an extremely interconnected and interdependent world, where national frontiers are no longer barriers to economic, social, and creative exchange, where decision-making is really done by the peoples and the nations comprising the United Nations, where the voices of all the nations are taken into account, and where societies are more inclusive. To get there, we need a global order, and we need a better global governance. We already have a roadmap to help us transition to this new paradigm, the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, endorsed by all the members of the United Nations. It's the most ambitious development plan humanity ever had. Future multilateralism needs to be more networked and inclusive in order to lead us to the implementation of this agenda. And the COVID-19 pandemic made it abundantly clear that to overcome today's fragilities, we need more, not less, international cooperation, inclusion, and strengthen impactful multilateral institutions. Our common goal is to reinvigorate the global governance system in such a way that multilateral institutions are fully empowered and equipped to deliver on their mandates and contribute to the achievements of the Sustainable Development Goals. Last year, Secretary General Antonio Guterres presented to the United Nations General Assembly his report entitled Our Common Agenda. In this action agenda, he laid out two possible scenarios for the future: breakdown and perpetual crisis, or breakthrough and a more sustainable and safer world. Global challenges need to be addressed in a coordinated and effective multilateral manner through a stronger multilateral system, which includes a diverse spectrum of stakeholders, not only the governments and political elite, but also civil society, young groups, academia, and the private sector. We also need more women to shape a renewed multilateralism, and I fully support the idea of really having a forum for women participating in political decisions today. No country can address global challenges in isolation, just trying to find solutions within their national borders. Many participants at the Global Baku Forum, who include current and former heads of state and government, have an important role to play in shaping this new multilateral order. And I sincerely hope that this collective wisdom will contribute to the global efforts in fostering innovative partnerships and revitalizing international cooperation in a time when it's needed most. The United Nations stand ready to support these endeavors. Only by working together, we can pave the way to a better global governance and towards more efficient and inclusive multi-stakeholder solutions to the global challenges. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Madam Under-Secretary General. And now I will turn to Dr. Ahmed Abul Ghait, who is the Secretary General of the League of Arab States. I don't know if you speak on behalf of all 22 nations simultaneously. That's an interesting effort, but if the UN can speak on behalf of all the nations of the world, Dr. Ahmed Abul Ghait, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Co-Chair. My very dear friend Ismail Sirajuddin, President Ilham Aliyev, distinguished participants. Allow me first to address very few brief words to President Ilham Aliyev. President, this is the first time I attend this Baku Forum. I visited this city as Foreign Minister of Egypt 3 times before. Last time it was in 2009. But, President, I really have to express to you how amazed I am of this development that is taking place in this city. You have turned this city into a great modern city, and I really greet you on your achievements. To turn to the subject matter, I think we all agree that we are going through tense times. In a super-connected world, crisis breeds crisis. People the world over are very wary of what the future might hold. Uncertainty is the name of the game, and anxiety and fear could lead to bad judgment and poor decision-making. That is exactly how crises turn into disasters. When times get difficult on the international arena, I personally prefer to look back to figure out the way forward. Times of crisis test our wisdom and our sense of history. Statecraft is the art of reading the future through the lens of the past. The history of the modern world order holds one ominous warning that kept repeating itself time and again. Never take peace for granted. We should not assume that peace is the natural state of affairs. It has to be achieved and sought after. It is largely a product of clever statecraft and accumulated historical wisdom. When peace is taken for granted, wars are more likely to break out. It takes a moment to ignite the spark of a war, but it takes years and decades to create the circumstances that lead to such moment, the moment of war. I think it took 50 years to prepare the ground for World War I, and just 4 days for the powder keg to explode. Now, we know it was unnecessary war. Leaders, as they were described later, were sleepwalking. It was an utter failure of statecraft, and it did not solve anything, paving the way for another world war that was even more devastating. I mean the Second World War. Only wisdom and a sense of history led to the peace that prevailed after the Second World War. That peace was not comprehensive, nor flawless, but was good enough. It was not achieved between countries who shared the same ideology or an identical worldview. It was not built on lofty ideals, but rather on realpolitik and balance of power. I do think that the #1 threat to world peace remains unchanged since the Napoleonic Wars in the early 19th century. It is great power competition, and it is pretty much easy to see that today, and why. The war in Ukraine is a case in point. Its knock-on effect is deeply felt all over the world. When great powers are engaged in conflict, the whole world is engulfed one way or another in the fight. We in the Middle East and in the Arab world are suffering, and suffering really deeply. And when a great powers fail to find common ground or agreed upon rules of behavior in the international arena, it becomes increasingly difficult to achieve progress in dealing with any of the global challenges facing the world. We should never sleepwalk once again to the abyss. Diplomacy and statecraft needs to be center stage. The stakes of global wars in a nuclear age are immensely higher now than any time before in history. Historical wisdom should guide us to find the right balance. It would not be easy, and it will take time and human ingenuity. Nevertheless, I am sure that out of the seeming chaos and disruption, a new balance will emerge to save the world from the trap of repeating history. It is important that we do not go blindly into a war. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Secretary General. Mr. President, we have many messages which I will make sure are brought to your attention and for which we are very grateful from many leaders, countries, institutions, wishing us well for this forum. But I know that you are very busy and that you have many other things to do and other meetings to undertake today. So I will not ask that we go through all of these and have them read out or presented to you. But if I may, Mr. President, thanks to both the opening remarks that you made and the space of freedom that you create for us, I would like to end on this session in your presence with a high note in the sense that we are really invited to be visionaries. Yes, the world is going through a crisis, but think, the people who invented the UN in 1945, 77 years ago, were visionaries thinking of a new way to make things work. A few years later, we got the Universal Declaration for Human Rights, but even more so, right here in Europe, we had, or very close to here in Europe, people like Jean Monnet and Schuman could look at the ravages of the Second World War, at all the blood and destruction that had taken place, and see a future of collaboration and participation. And some of the cynics at the time referred to them as the apatrides, those who didn't have any nationality. But they saw this vision of the EU. And the EU became, in fact, so successful that within one generation, German and French youth cannot imagine their countries going to war. This is an amazing achievement when their countries had been to war in 1870, in 1914, and in 1939. And so, what can we say today? Well, we haven't mentioned some of the amazing things that are taking place today and that should give us inspiration, Mr. President, to go forward. We have had, for the first time in the history of humanity, all the countries of the world, big and small, regardless of ideology, agreed on the Millennium Development Goals. So these 8 goals are the primary goals we should pursue for 15 years. And then they came back and agreed on the Sustainable Development Goals, in 2015 and said, this is what should guide humanity for the next 15 years. I mean, we somehow take that as kind of a granted thing, but countries that have so many problems, that have fights, that have, etc., could get together around these goals. And an institution that is based on a system designed on the individual sovereign states has had to confront global issues, from climate change to the pandemic that attacks friend and foe alike. But the climate change issue, although it's very severe till now, it is also a great example of science-based analytical policies and of evidence-based regulations. And this is another great step forward, instead of just the struggle and the tearing apart of political interests. And so, Mr. Chairman, Mr. President, we should dare to dream indeed and believe in the power of our dreams, but remain firmly rooted in the realities of the present and the future. And we must ensure indeed that we can move from conflict to peace, and from fear to security, and from national security to human security, as we all move towards living in greater diversity, what Nelson Mandela very poetically referred to as rainbow nations, where there will be greater gender balance and there will be greater inclusion of all nationalities, as we continue to seek to maintain, as Abraham Lincoln so beautifully said, that everywhere in the world, the government of the people, by the people, and for the people is maintained. And Mr. President, I take that this is your mandate to us to come up with something, and you've given us this space of freedom in the Global Baku Forum, where we look forward to our discussions and reflections of diversity as we try to move and be worthy of the wisdom of those who came before us, and maybe make a contribution to those who will come later. And with that, Mr. President, I would like to thank you for having given us so much of your time, and I declare the Global Baku Forum is now formally opened, and we look forward to being with you and reporting back to you at the end of that. Thank you, and this meeting is now adjourned.